For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sanel Lamini. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me for Suttner's View, a weekly commentary on South Africa's political scene. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much.
Yes. During the weekend, the ANC threw over 50,000 people to its anniversary celebrations. What do you think of the massive turnout, their statement, and its focus on the Freedom Charter?
What I'm here for is not to display. I think it was a show of strength, and the question, Govan Mbeki once said, the thing with speeches is that they blow away with the wind. Now what we've got to ask ourselves is what happened there that will not blow away with the wind? What was the substance? And when you read the speech, there's not really much to it, frankly. I got the speech and I just read it straight through. There was nothing to stop and think about. And historically, the January the 8th statement has been very important. There was a time when we used to look at it, study every word, discuss every word, discuss what it meant for students, for workers, for women, for people on the land, and so forth. Now, this speech is pretty empty in that regard. But its focus on the Freedom Charter is not surprising. First of all, it is the 60th anniversary of the Freedom Charter. And the ANC is the organization that is primarily associated with the Freedom Charter. Sometimes it claims that it is its document, but it was never meant to be a document for the ANC alone, but a people's document. Now, there are other reasons than sentimentality about the 60th anniversary why the ANC should want to focus on the Freedom Charter. We've seen how NUMSA has said that the Freedom Charter must be implemented in full. And they've criticized the failure to take action in regard to mineral wealth, which they say is in accordance with the Freedom Charter. Equally, the economic freedom fighters have focused on the land and on the mines, and they have themselves cast themselves as bearers of the message of the Freedom Charter. Now, the way the ANC statement deals with the Freedom Charter, it's a bit similar to the way NUMSA deals with it. It says, NUMSA would say, the Freedom Charter says this, but it hasn't been done, and then, they fail to implement the Freedom Charter. Now, the Freedom Charter is not a checklist. It's not like a shopping list that you have, and you go through the people shall govern, like they do in the statement. They say, people shall govern, we have got people's power, the way people elect the ANC and the way they elect MPs. Tick. Then they move to the next thing. Now, the Freedom Charter is not that sort of document. It really needs to be understood in a way that contextualizes it. And the theologians, liberation theologians, say that the Bible is not a text which must only be understood by its language. It must be understood by its spirit, by its ethos. And I think the way the ANC discussed the Freedom Charter at the Greenpoint, at the Cape Town Stadium, was very much like a checklist. It was very unimaginative. it really didn't answer any questions about how the Freedom Charter should be understood today.
And how do you think the Freedom Charter's anniversary should be treated in this year of its 60th anniversary?
Well, I don't know exactly how it should be marked in terms of whether there should be celebrations or what it should be, but I can address the question of how I think it should be analyzed and understood. And the first thing is it must be looked at contextually. The Freedom Charter was written 60 years ago, and you can't say it is evergreen, it's as fresh as it always was, because there's some parts of the Freedom Charter that need us to apply our minds and say, what meaning should this be given in the year 2015? I think that the time when the Freedom Charter was developed, it was in some ways a very advanced document. In some senses, it related to what was very specific to South Africa. Cattle dipping. You won't find cattle dipping in the European Union Covenant on Human Rights or the United Nations Covenant on Human Rights. You'll find this because this was a problem in apartheid South Africa. So on the one hand, it spoke to things that really upset people in South Africa, but it also was universal, speaking about freedoms that people all over the world value. And in that respect, it could be compared with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, although in some ways I would say it was more advanced. In some respects, the Freedom Charter captures understandings and what people had learnt in the 1950s. There was a lot of emphasis at that time on governments needing to control the commanding heights of the economy, hence nationalization. And since then, I think people have learnt a lot that nationalization in itself doesn't necessarily benefit the poor. We've got to be sure that the way in which you control resources will ultimately result in reducing of inequalities and other things. It's interesting that when the ANC Youth League under Malema at the time, when Malema was calling for nationalization, people like Bridget Radebe, a BEE mining capitalist, she was in support of it. I think Motsepe is as well. And so it's interesting, we need to ask ourselves what will result from nationalization. But where I feel the treatment of the Freedom Charter needs to be located in the context of what we've learned since then is in taking words like the people shall govern, the doors of learning and culture will be open, concepts like customs, etc. These things don't have one meaning that was set in 1955. And it seems to me that the way the ANC addressed it at the January 8th statement doesn't take account of what has been learnt in struggle since then in dealing with the people shall govern. They really erase the experience of the 1980s. In the 1980s, it will be recalled that there was a period of ungovernability and people drove the police and Bantu administration officials out of many townships. Now, ungovernability was not seen as an end in itself, and that is why organs of popular power were established. People took steps to control crime in their community with street committees, block committees, ward committees and so forth. And Weza Made of Uitenhage said, what we are doing here now is implementing the first clause of the Freedom Charter, the people shall govern. Now that experience needs to be drawn on. We need to ask ourselves, how can we give people in communities today a sense that their political activities, their role as citizens, is not restricted to voting every 5 years? And that will be how we can make the Freedom Charter, by interrogating its meanings, we can make it a living document today.
That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about the Freedom Charter. Thank you, Professor.
Thanks.